Back in the day, the world was dangerous, violent, and painful. Sort of like today. Dinosaurs, some of the most successful creatures ever, seem to have taken it in their stride. But it'll take everything modern medical science can throw at them to figure out how these famously shattered dinosaurs managed to heal so well.
Oh, and it's... Oh!
Phil Manning will use industrial-strength engineering to investigate what made dinosaurs so indestructible. Armed to the teeth, meat-eating dinosaurs spread terror for 165 million years. They could dish out the punishment, but they paid a high price. In the kill or be killed world of the predator, where disputes get settled by tooth and claw, a broken bone or infected wound can spell a slow, agonizing demise. It was no different back in the rough and tumble Cretaceous. Mighty meat-eaters like T-Rex mixed it up with prey and predator alike. They suffered colossal injuries that would kill most predators today, and limped through a land rife with deadly infection and disease. Yet, they became some of the most successful animals ever to live. Gonzo paleontologist Phil Manning wants to know what made dinosaurs such tough survivors. In his search for answers, Phil's prepared to go to extremes. He travels the world, enlisting the help of experts, playing with fire, and even talking to the animals. His methods may be offbeat, but his science is on target, leading him to some surprisingly fresh conclusions. And now we're invited along. Phil's quest for dinosaurs' secret healing powers begins by catching a fearsome meat-eater that still bears its war wounds 65 million years later. This T-Rex's violent past has drawn Phil to Chicago's Field Museum to meet with museum paleontologist Pete Makovicki.
She's a big girl.
Oh yeah. When you get this close, you really understand the magnitude of these animals.
At one gulp and we could fit inside her chest.
Her name is Sue, the largest T-Rex ever found. Inscribed in Sue's bones is a blood-drenched biography full of violence, pain, and suffering. On the 6-meter-long tail, a bony straitjacket fuses 2 injured vertebrae. On her left leg, a severe infection gnawed deeply into the bone. And that's her good side. Turn her around, and her upper arm bone is injured, the shoulder bashed. Below, 3 ribs cracked like twigs.
How did she manage to survive all this? To figure it out, I need to reverse engineer Sue's recovery process back to what caused the original trauma, because not all bones heal alike.
Phil heads to the Purdue University Vet School in Indiana to learn how bones break with veterinary pathologist Kevin Donnelly. First, they'll try to break one that's close to the size of Sue's arm bone, this shin bone of a horse.
Wow, that's heavy. God, it doesn't even budge. It's so strong, this bone. So, what in your chamber of horrors here are you going to use to break this bone?
Well, if we can break it at all, it's going to take some heavy tools. I think we'll put it in the vise and give it a few twists and see how we do.
Nature perfected the recipe for bones eons ago, and their composition and structure haven't changed much. Seeing how modern animal bones break will give Phil a glimpse into the horrific injuries dinosaurs like Sue endured.
Right.
Why do I feel like I'm in some sort of perverse cooking show now?
Right. Give it your full strength.
All right. Oh,
Not even a budge.
absolutely nothing.
I can only imagine how brutal a T-Rex fight must have been to injure a bone this size, just like the one in Sue's arm.
Kevin has to escalate the arms race.
How's that?
Oh, you don't see one of these at the Kentucky Derby.
But even the axe barely scratches the bone.
How's that? Tough.
It's incredibly tough. I think I could probably get through it if I had maybe half an hour of hammering away like a lumberjack.
I think you probably need a slightly smaller bone to match our smaller efforts.
Phil's got a real feel now for the mighty whack Sue's arm must have taken. Next, he tries a pig's thigh bone, about the size of one of Sue's broken ribs.
Oh, hey, that flexes. That is much more supple than the other bone.
But Phil's optimism is premature. This little piggy isn't giving in easily.
200 pounds of paleontologist is not enough to break this bone.
But then Phil digs deep.
It's going. Oh, and it's... Oh, man, that is gross. Oh, wow.
There you go. Snap the bone right in half.
Guy, blah. That smells really good. Oh, man. How fresh is this?
A couple of days old.
The bending force causes a clean break called a transverse fracture. It's the kind of hit Sue's ribs probably took, and Phil can now see why they healed so well.
So if you were able to get those bones together, that could be set and the bone could be healed again.
Absolutely.
But not all breaks are this neat and tidy, especially in nature. This gorgosaur, on display at the Indianapolis Children's Museum, suffered a much messier and more serious break than anything Sue had to deal with. A type of tyrannosaur like Sue, the gorgosaur was a meat-eater who had to fight to survive. And it's got one horrific war wound. Its right leg is smashed to pieces, what's believed to be the worst compound fracture ever found in the dinosaur fossil record. The gorgosaur should have died from this, but didn't. Kevin shows Phil what the dinosaur was up against.
So, compound fractures?
Sure, and I brought something for you, Phil.
I don't know whether I should be more worried that you have a stocking in your pocket, or what do you expect me to do with it?
Well, let's use this to emulate skin. So I think if we put this on the bone, we'll be able to demonstrate what an open fracture looks like.
I have to say, this is the first time that I've ever put on stockings. Certainly on a dead animal.
This time, Phil will try to smash a broad area of bone and break it into pieces, like the gorgosaur leg.
Hopefully I hit it square. Ow! The bone went up into my thumb.
The blow strikes across a wide area, producing fractures in all directions.
That would really hurt.
Yeah, that bone shattered very nicely, and there's multiple pieces.
Oh, ugh, that is grim.
So there's a shard of bone sticking right through as if it was poking through the skin.
It would have been a devastating blow to the gorgosaur's leg, making the job of knitting the bone together much tougher. With a shattered leg, the gorgosaur had a hard time pursuing prey and faced starvation.
For many animals, a broken bone is the end of the story, but both Gorgosaurus and T-Rex survive such trauma. I want to know what happens next. How does bone repair?
The first clue lies deep inside the bone, a place few people have visited.
It's strange how it's a popular misconception that bone is dead by many folks.
Though bone boasts a tough, rugged exterior, it's really soft at heart, teeming with vital cellular activity.
This red tissue here is bone marrow. Those are the cells that make the red and white blood cells that go around our veins. They start out in the bone marrow.
When a bone fractures, this tissue springs into action. Cells in the marrow and lining transform into specialized repair cells. They shore up the damage and begin rebuilding. How long that process takes depends on whether the animal's warm or cold-blooded. And when it comes to dinosaurs, no one's really sure. The Gorgosaur healed from its horrific injury. And similarly, Sue managed to heal her fractured rib cage. New bone growth joined the cleanly broken ends. But not all her ribs healed so nicely.
This one actually, the callus growth initiated, but the two broken halves never quite merged. There's actually an open space between these two ribs, so that would have hurt for a long time all through life.
Bones are engineering marvels, adapted for healing, but sometimes things can go badly wrong along the way. To gauge a tyrannosaur's chances for recovery, I think I need to look at how a large living animal today repairs its injuries.
No ordinary paleontologist. Phil's ingenious advances to the science come from looking beyond his field. And so he heads to rural Pennsylvania, where there's a big demand for state-of-the-art surgery on large animals. Orthopedic veterinarian Dean Richardson has treated hundreds of bad breaks in the big bones of horses. In some ways, these animals aren't so different from tyrannosaurs.
One of the common descriptions of horses is to describe them as either suicidal or homicidal, one or the other. But horses figure out many, many ways of hurting you and hurting themselves, every possible way.
Like tyrannosaurs, horses have powerful, heavy bodies. Their legs can handle huge stresses up and down the bones. One wrong step on rough ground or cornering at high speed loads the limb in an abnormal way, which can break a limb bone. The New Bolton Center sees a lot of that. Today's patient damaged its lower leg, an area that's difficult to repair. Contrary to popular belief, bones don't necessarily heal stronger than they were before. A broken bone can remain vulnerable for the rest of the animal's life. This horse's injury already healed once without surgery, but the natural repair just didn't take, leaving the animal lame.
So this horse, even though it did end up healing the injury, it didn't heal in a functional position. The only way it could be made functional was the assistance of man.
Dean and his surgical team have their work cut out for them. They have to undo the poor healing before they can reset the leg joint. Wrangling the big bones of a half-ton animal requires lots of muscle and heavy-duty tools.
It looks complicated, but orthopedic surgery is basically just carpentry with a lot of blood.
Dean realigns the bones so that the leg will function properly and bear the animal's weight. To fuse the lower limb together, they sink 10-centimeter long screws through the bones. When the correctly aligned limb is completely healed, it will be stronger than before the injury. Fortunately, this horse's false step turned into a lucky break, thanks to human intervention and some hardware. Just minutes later, the patient is awake and alert. And amazingly, it's already able to stand. But in the wild, this probably wouldn't have such a happy ending.
So if this animal's living in a natural environment like our friends the dinosaurs, and it happens to acquire an injury like this, do you think it would survive very long?
I think it pretty unlikely that this horse would have survived in prehistoric times because it wouldn't have been able to escape, unless, of course, it was like living in the Garden of Eden and there were no predators around.
But the Cretaceous was no Garden of Eden and no general hospital. Over and over again, Sue healed functionally without medical help and got herself back in the hunt before she starved or became prey herself. Her injuries can tell Phil about her healing powers and about the intense violence she faced. To understand how the T-Rex's body responded to injury, Phil looks at Sue's arm, which suffered a terrible trauma and an ugly repair.
One thing that really does not look very healthy is this great big spike coming out of the upper arm bone, the humerus here. What has gone on there?
Yeah, looking at the underside of the humerus, we actually have this bony spur, which is probably a tendon avulsion where muscle was torn off the bone.
is quite clear. If Sue was, in fact, a female dinosaur, this would have just been a scratch. If it had been a male, he'd been laid up for a week.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Asking his wife to bring him,
Absolutely.
cold beer and a hot water bottle and whatnot.
To rip a heavy tendon off an arm bone, causing an injury called an avulsion, takes extreme force. Phil's about to find out how much. He can't experiment with the actual fossil, so he'll have to make a realistic copy of the humerus bone. In a 3-day process, they take a mold, or negative impression, of the original bone. Fill it with polyurethane resins, and cast an exact replica of the arm.
That looks about done.
Phil joins Pete and museum curator Bill Simpson to reenact the tendon avulsion injury, which means subjecting the freshly cast humerus to some Cretaceous-style abuse.
This is what actually came out of the mold, and as you can see, this is an extremely high-resolution positive copy of the actual bone itself.
A tendon connects the arm muscle to the humerus bone. Tendon and muscle work together to pull on the bony framework. But sometimes they can get stretched beyond their limit. For the demo, Bill uses a rope as the tendon, embedded and glued into the bone at the attachment point.
Phil, you can be the muscle. Here's the tendon.
I think Sue had more muscle in her arm than I have in my whole body.
So, Bill, you and I will kind of clamp this down and serve as Sue's body mass or inertia, and
All
then
right.
Phil can be sort of the action of the muscle, and he's sort of pulling downwards, which is the direction that that tendon would have had in life.
Why do I get the feeling that you guys are going to be much more stable than me?
It's not called an injury for nothing, Phil.
That's what worries me.
Phil's got to put everything he has into it.
Bloody hell.
Yep. There we go.
Okay.
And it took out a piece of bone with it.
An injury like this takes an enormous amount of force. Sue didn't get it while frolicking in the forest.
It doesn't happen from just natural action of the muscle. There's usually some kind of added impact or stress on the limb itself.
To find out how well Sue healed from this severe injury, the team needs to examine the arm bone with a medical CT scanner. They can't do it in the museum, and Sue won't fit in an ambulance. So Bill and Pete must delicately remove the priceless bone from the mount, being careful not to inflict more damage. As much as Phil would like to help, only Bill and Pete have the authority to perform this operation.
This is the last of the 4 screws, so the humerus should be getting loose. Okay, I got it. Oh, gosh.
I can't get over I'm holding a piece of Sue. I think I better ask you to pack it, because I don't trust myself.
Typically, researchers rely on the cast copies of the bones, but Phil needs the real deal.
So how many times has this bone left the building?
First time out of the building in 10 years.
Where better to send injured bones than the hospital? Phil and Pete head across town to the Loyola University Medical Center, where the staff eagerly awaits their ancient patient.
Thanks, Mark.
Feels kind of odd putting these into a CT scanner like this. I must admit, I am nervous that we're using a piece of kit like this because that's really dense. And whether they will actually get through the bone will be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, especially on a medical scanner, it's designed to go through human bones, and of course, both these bones are much more robust than anything in the human body, and to boot, they've been fossilized, so their density is going to be much greater than that of living tissue.
Fingers crossed.
It's easy to forget that fossils aren't really bones, but precise mineral replicas of bones. Not quite what the medical CT scanner was designed to look at.
If the scan can penetrate the fossil, it'll be the first time we can actually see how efficiently Sue healed severe injuries.
The CT scan snaps individual X-ray slices down the length of the bone, then stacks and collates those pictures to form a three-dimensional model. Luckily, the team doesn't have to wait long to see if the X-rays can penetrate the fossil. The first few slices of Sue's arm will show if it's working or not.
Oh, woof! That is nice. And look at it there, you can see the avulsion maybe there. And look, it really is thinning out. How does this compare to human bones?
It's very similar, actually.
I love it when people say
very
that.
similar.
That's good to hear. It should be. It's the same toolkit.
After the scan, technician Raymond Matoya uses a high-power computer to render the X-rays into 3D models. The model reveals that the trauma to the bone was more extensive than first suspected.
That looks brutal. It really does.
It's just a huge pit that was eroded out of the bone after the tendon avulsion itself.
The CT scan confirms that Sue repaired the deep wound. New bone, the bright white material, buttresses the site like a castle wall. This suggests an intriguing possibility, far different from the horse's injury.
Do you think it's possible that we're seeing compensation for the fact the bone has been hit with such trauma that when it has repaired, it's stronger than it was originally in those sort of areas?
That could be. I think that would require a little bit of sort of engineering and modeling to figure that one out.
That's exactly what Phil has in mind.
I hope the data from the CT scan holds all the information I need to test the repaired bone and see if it's really as strong as it looks, because the alternative test isn't pretty.
The easiest way to test the strength of something is to drive it to the breaking point. And that's what happens at an Indiana test track in the United States. At CAPE, the Center for Advanced Product Evaluation, engineers count down the final moments before a crash test. Phil's here with CAPE Operations Manager John Porter to see about applying auto safety science to dinosaurs.
Yeah, there's approximately, we're running about 120 data channels in here. Typically, a barrier runs us between 300 to 500 hours of prep time in post-processing.
Wow, so hundreds of hours of preparation for a few seconds of data that's so critical.
Yeah, and you don't get a second chance, so this is a one-shot deal.
I find it amazing, the technology that you're using to understand the behavior of materials that compose this ambulance. We're using the same techniques to study bones. Do you think you can crash me a dinosaur?
Well, it may be hard for us to simulate a dinosaur out on the track here, but it might work. We'll see.
From the twisted wreckage of CAPE's crash tests comes data for designing safer vehicles and stronger materials. But as Phil's finding out, it takes some sacrifice.
So what's the vehicle down there for?
That is the bullet vehicle that's going to impact the ambulance.
That's a perfectly good field vehicle. I could use that in the field for collecting dinosaurs.
Yes, you could.
So is this the driver?
This is a driver. He is a hybrid 2 50th male, and he weighs approximately 165 pounds.
I hate to tell you, buddy, they're about to wreck your car. And it's a nice car. I'll give you $50 for it. They're going to destroy it.
For safety, the truck's drained of fuel and hooked into a cable tow system that runs under the track.
Okay, Kent, we're hooked up.
Just a minute to go. The cameras and computers are armed to record. Phil finds a safe vantage point.
That means get out of the truck, I take it.
Evacuate the vehicle. Everybody should be clear.
You're clear for launch down this end. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, launching.
The tow system accelerates the truck to precisely 50 kilometers per hour.
There goes my car. Ow! That's gotta hurt.
More than 130 sensors and accelerometers measure the force of impact on specific parts of the ambulance as the half-ton truck smashes into it.
I'm glad I wasn't the dummy driving the truck. I'm just usually the dummy driving my car, but I'm going to drive a lot more carefully now. That is amazing. They haven't budged.
No, it looks just like we did when we started the test. So everything's stayed in position, everybody's stayed belted, and the doors even function after the test, so that's a very good result.
While I would love to put Sue in the driver's seat and see how the Tyrannosaurus wrecks, I think the engineers at Cape can offer a less destructive way to test the strength of Sue's healed arm bone.
With the data from the CT scan and his knowledge of bone construction, Phil plans to run a sophisticated simulation using a program known as Finite Element Analysis, or FEA. Cape engineers Xu Yang and Ryan Hoover use FEA to create digital doppelgangers of the real thing. Crash testing verifies the results. If the computer does its job, no one gets hurt.
How do you actually design your test?
Well, the FEA model was built before we ever conducted a real crash test. And that's really the whole purpose of the model in itself, is to be able to run through the different scenarios, different speeds, different configurations of the fire truck, all in the simulation world.
FEA breaks a complex object like a car or maybe a dinosaur into a mesh of tiny, discrete pieces or elements. The computer knows the physical properties of each element, and based on that, it can calculate how the entire mesh will behave in whatever situation the engineers throw at it. The technology gives auto engineers complete control and flexibility, especially during the design phase. Every new vehicle design depends on FEA. Now Phil wants to harness its power to test Sue's very old repair job. Back at his lab at the University of Manchester in England, Phil's team builds an FEA model of the humerus bone using data from the CT scan. Simulated force is applied to the bone. As the force ramps up, stress points appear as warm colors. So when Sue starts seeing red, watch out. Loaded with 400 kilograms of force, the bone shaft approaches its breaking point. But the repaired injury site still holds strong. Incredibly, and unlike the injured horse, the FEA reveals the injury site is now as strong as the rest of the bone. But how long did the healing process take? Was Sue laid up for a while, nursing her wound, or did she get back on her feet in record time? To find the answer, Phil has to look at Sue's closest living relatives. Dinosaurs and many modern reptiles share the same ancient ancestor, and birds are the living descendants of dinosaurs. Though distantly related, reptiles and birds heal their bones in different ways and at entirely different rates. So was Sue more like her descendants, the birds, or like ancestral reptiles when it came to healing? Phil teams up with paleontologist Will Strait to stage a rather stilted demonstration of their bone healing techniques.
It always worries me when someone says, let's do an experiment that shows how you break bones, and then they give me a pair of stilts.
Well, in this case, we can use one stilt to represent a reptile and one stilt to represent a bird. And what we'll do is we'll break them.
In a few hours, Phil will test the repaired stilts to see which healed fastest. First, the bird approach, with man-made supplies standing in for the bird's own bone repair materials.
Well, the first thing that birds do after they break a bone is produce a great deal of soft tissue in the wound. That soft tissue very rapidly turns to bone, very rapidly.
This epoxy adhesive represents that soft tissue, which acts as a kind of glue in the break. Thanks to their consistently high metabolism, birds can produce as much glue as they need.
Time to mend our break.
For the reptile break, Phil mixes a smaller pot of glue. Cold-blooded reptiles have a slower metabolism and can't replace soft tissue with new bone quickly, especially when they have no source of external heat. That means it's life in the slow lane when healing.
Reptiles may take upwards of 2 years to repair a bone break if they don't get the heat they need, or if it's intermittent. And they have an unfortunate dilemma. Do they then walk on that limb while they're trying to find food?
All right, I'm already a little bit nervous about this as a mend, because there is just not enough glue here. It's not sticking. Ow.
As in nature, both brakes need time for the glue to harden into a strong bond. But the bird gets something extra.
Sounds all right.
This heat gun represents a bird's internal temperature. By generating its own heat, the bird can raise the temperature at the brake, reducing the healing time. After a few hours of curing, it's time to put reptile and bird back on their feet.
Well, here comes a moment of truth. Ooh, heating looks like it's done the trick. That looks okay.
First, the bird repair.
It's quite solid, actually. Not sure whether it would take my bulk, but let's have a go. Thank you.
The repaired stilt works as well as the unbroken one. Lots of glue and the added heat during healing appear to be a winning combination.
Well, the bird brake seems to function quite well. I think it's time to test the reptile. Bring on the reptile bone.
The reptile stilt got the same repair time as the bird, but with less glue and no heat.
Why do I feel nervous? Because I just know this hasn't set as well. Oh, crikey. This is, I can feel it moving, actually. It doesn't work. I've broken my leg again. Ow.
So for fast healing, birds have the advantage over reptiles. After injury, they can quickly start looking for food again. And that's crucial, because birds have to eat a lot to stoke that internal furnace that comes in so handy in a medical emergency.
Somewhere between slow-healing reptiles and fast-healing birds stood the dinosaurs. I'd like to find out if dinosaurs were fast healers, like the birds, or slow to heal, like reptiles.
In his lab at Northern Virginia Community College, Will Strait tries to extract the answer about the speed of dinosaur healing from dinosaur fossils.
You've got living animals which you can actually observe the healing process, but with an extinct animal, all you've got left is the bone. How can you sort of pull apart what's happened with it?
Well, there is one piece of information we can collect that kind of gives us a window onto maybe the process of healing, and that's to check the temperature at which the bone was manufactured.
To do that, Will grinds dinosaur bones that suffered a traumatic injury.
You're drilling precious dinosaur bone.
Museums don't like me very much.
Will drills into the fracture site and samples the fossilized bone around it, where new tissue grew to repair the break. He wants to see if, as in birds, the break site heated up.
And actually, that's enough for a single sample. And when I run this through the instrumentation, it'll tell me whether or not the temperature is elevated or normal for that spot.
So it's a bit like playing blind man's bluff when you're sort of getting warmer, warmer, and warmer as you're getting towards the trauma.
He takes samples at increments along the bone, from normal tissue all the way to the healed fracture, so he can make a comparison. When bone heals, it locks within it a specific kind of atom, called an oxygen isotope. The hotter the bone, the more of these oxygen isotopes are captured. And that's what Will's looking for in the bone powder. He'll compare the isotope ratio of normal bone to the injured bone. And out of tiny amounts of bone powder comes a hugely significant finding.
Basically, what we found was that the coldest bone was here in the shaft where there isn't much of an injury, but the bone around that forms in the trauma, called the callus, that can be relatively hot by as much as 4 degrees. According to these isotopes, the spots on a bone as gnarly as this one can be as much as 6 degrees warmer.
So this really is the closest you're going to get to literally shoving a thermometer into a dinosaur and finding out how this thing actually functioned when it's repairing itself.
Will's research suggests that after a fracture, the repair process kicked into gear. The dinosaur's body began filling the fissure with large-celled cartilage, the same way reptiles do today. But then it turned on the heat. Increased cellular activity along the break raised the temperature, speeding the transformation of cartilage into bone. This brilliant innovation enabled Sue to get well soon, before food and luck ran out. Dinosaurs may have been the first to evolve this rapid bone healing technique. In Sue's case, her bone healed to the same strength as before. It was a secret weapon that turned the already fearsome Tyrannosaur into a true superpower. So for a mighty meat-eater, broken bones were a setback, not necessarily a death sentence. Phil's FEA crash test of Sue's arm reveals a healed bone built to withstand punishment. And the rapid rate of healing shows that a broken bone didn't stay useless for long. As far as we know, dinosaurs are the first big animals to heal this way. Phil wonders if Sue's age factored into how well her bones healed. He heads back to Chicago, where Pete Makovicki takes a close-up look at Sue. A thin slice of a broken rib might hold the answer. Like trees, dinosaurs followed a yearly cycle of fast, then slow growth, producing a telltale ring of new bone each year. The wider the ring, the more the growth. Under the microscope, Sue's life history comes into focus.
It looks quite beautiful, actually. It looks like a piece of artwork. But what does it actually show us?
Well, you're looking at about the last half of Sue's life in terms of her growth record. This would be the 15th growth ring, the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th. And then the outermost layer actually packs about 9 growth rings into it, which tells us that at age 19, she reached her mature size.
This means Sue probably broke her ribs about the time she became an adult, at least 10 years before she died at the ripe old age of 28.
So looking at Sue is a bit like looking at like a teenager, really. This is rapid growth spurt, followed by sort of leveling out as you get older.
She would have put on about 4 to 5 pounds of mass per day, compared to a human teenager, which would put on about half an ounce a day. That's quite a remarkable growth rate, and probably translated to a real ravenous appetite.
I must admit, I don't know any 18-year-olds who are 45 feet long and probably weighed in at 5 tons.
No, you'd need a real giant fridge for them to raid, you know, when they get their hunger pangs. That's true.
Voraciously hungry and at her physical prime, Sue was a risk-taker by nature. She likely looked for food and found trouble, getting injured but healing quickly.
A dinosaur's speedy recovery meant it was less vulnerable to large predators or starvation. But I'm thinking about the most insidious killer of all, infection. We don't see much of it in the dinosaur world, and I want to know why.
Bite wounds are an open invitation to infection, and the Gorgosaur got a wound clear down to the bone. To stand a chance, it needed a little time to repair its leg. But time was not on its side. The impact drove bone splinters through the dinosaur's thick hide. Back when Phil visited Kevin Donnelly, they wondered about infection's role in wounds like this.
That's going to cause huge problems because, of course, skin is this wonderful barrier between the environment and the innards of the animal.
When the infection sets up in here, it's going to prevent these bones from healing properly, and it also has serious consequences for the systemic infection in the entire animal's body. It's the kind of fracture that usually results in death.
But somehow, it was the infection and not the Gorgosaur that stopped dead in its tracks. The Gorgosaur survived to fight another day. Phil suspects that wasn't just luck. He wants to see what he can learn about the Gorgosaur's immune system by looking at an animal it shares an ancestor with, the gators. Like the Gorgosaur, alligators are ferocious predators. They're also remarkably infection-resistant, considering their disease-laden swamp environment. At Florida's alligator farm, Phil can study how crocodilians fend off infection, and maybe learn a thing or two about dinosaurs. He tracks down paleobiologist Greg Erickson, who's been sinking his teeth into the mouths of alligators. A gator's infectious smile can hide a mouthful of bad teeth and rotten gums. Luckily, like a dinosaur, an alligator constantly replaces its teeth.
So instead of having 2 sets of teeth like us, these animals might, go through 3,000 teeth in their lifetime.
Sorry, 3,000 teeth?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, just look around. If you look in the dirt around here, you'll find lots of teeth.
So how do they lose these teeth?
These teeth in a big adult will last about a year, and then the root will erode away, and another tooth will push up behind it. This will fall out, and voila, they're in the dirt.
Alligators are the only living reptile to do this, but sometimes things go wrong.
They'll shatter a freshly erupted tooth, and it creates an abscess, and they'll get an infection in there. What'll happen is the bone will go right up over the top of the tooth socket and seal it off, and they'll have no more ability to replace teeth at that point.
Greg doesn't have to look far for a disgusting example.
Just goes to show, we don't need a living gorgosaur to understand how that occurred. There it is right there. It's the same anatomy.
Even with serious gum infections, alligators lose their teeth, not their life. But other wounds can have more dire consequences. Today, Greg Erickson pays a house call to a rather uncooperative patient.
Ready? Go, let's go.
One of its back legs was bitten off, and the other's got a nasty-looking open wound. They're moving the injured gator out of the fray to give it some R&R in its own pen. Its wounds need attention. But incredibly, neither leg is infected. Remarkable, because a bite from one of these creatures is like waging bacterial warfare. The Cretaceous world of the Gorgosaur wasn't so different. A diet of raw and rotting flesh doesn't exactly promote oral hygiene. So a dinosaur bite could deliver death 2 ways: fast kill and slow infection. To prove the power of an alligator's bite, Greg's going to measure its bite force. Easier said than done.
All right, you can go ahead and slide the mouthful off.
Like the Gorgosaur, alligators live and die by their long, toothy jaws.
Okay, everybody hang on.
Wow. What a nice set of dentures you have, my friend.
Ah, I missed it. Ready? Do it again. Ready? Yep. Oh, yeah. Good bite. 2,210 pounds.
When you say 2,000 pounds, what is that? Is that like a 2,000 pound weight landing on your foot?
Yeah, a ton of bite force. So it's if this animal were to get a hold of you, if you can bench press a ton, you can get out. Otherwise, you're pretty much there for the rest of the day.
If an alligator has that power, just imagine the bite force of a tyrannosaur.
Obviously, depending on the size of prey it's going to attack, what sort of things can these jaws deliver in terms of injuries?
Well, just the blunt trauma of being hit with a ton of force like that is going to cause damage. It can shatter bones, induce immediate shock. You can imagine, it's like getting hit by a car.
Yep.
With similar force, a Gorgosaur's bite could shatter bone and drive infection deep into the wound. Yet the Gorgosaur managed to dodge infection. Biochemist Mark Merchant thinks that Gorgo's cousin, the gator, might help explain how. He seldom sees truly serious, life-threatening infection in these animals, and he wondered why.
While growing up in Southeast Texas, I was around gators my entire life. I did a lot of fishing and hunting in areas where there were a lot of gators, and I noticed that they would be missing limbs often, but they heal very rapidly, and in fact, without infection, typically. Right.
Mark reasoned that if gators had unusual immune systems, perhaps humans could someday reap the benefit.
Go 6 feet.
To test his theory, all he needs is some blood. The gator wants the same.
Make sure you use plenty of tape now. There's no time to be cheap here.
Do you want me to keep the tension on this?
Yes, please.
Okay. You didn't need asking twice then, did you?
All right, Christy?
Yep.
You got it? You got it? You got it?
Got my leg.
Mark must collect blood from live alligators so he can study the immunity properties.
No, you're okay. Most of the immune system components are in the blood.
And to extract this information each time you have to do this.
Yeah, it's...
You're insane, man.
This is the fun part of the job.
The fun part? Oh, man.
Mark managed to coax some gator blood without shedding a drop of his own. at least until now.
I'm going to draw a little bit of my own blood. I use this as normal human serum, which is a bit problematic, if you consider me normal. But
I'm not going to answer that one. I've just seen you riding a gator. There's nothing normal about riding a gator.
So I can draw just a little tube of human serum here, and we'll compare that.
Once Mark collects his gator and human blood samples, he isolates the part of the blood that contains the infection fighters. He wants to see if gator blood delivers a bigger bite against disease.
So you're literally separating out the different building blocks of blood?
That's correct. We're going to separate the cells, the red and white blood cells, away from the clear part, the liquid part that we call plasma.
After spinning the blood at high speed in a centrifuge, the lighter plasma containing the infection fighters rises to the top.
I'm putting gloves on for this, especially because we're dealing with your blood. Who knows what's inside your blood?
The yellowish plasma contains proteins and infection-fighting agents. There's more plasma in the gator's blood on the left than in Mark's on the right. Then Mark prepares a batch of nasty bacteria called MRSA, a strain that notoriously resists antibiotics.
What I want to do now is I want to take this mixture and put it onto this petri dish.
Mark spreads the bacteria over a nourishing growth medium, where it will flourish overnight.
If you plate the bacteria, spread the bacteria without adding any serum, here's what you see. Look at all the bacteria. There's probably maybe 500 or 600 bacterial colonies, and each one of that represents a single bacterium.
Mark combines the human serum with the bacteria. After the mixture sits overnight, it's clear that the human infection fighters have hardly made a dent in the number of bacteria.
By the same token, if we spread the bacteria that has been mixed with the alligator serum and let it incubate overnight, you can see that the alligator serum has really, really reduced the number of bacteria greatly.
It's absolutely wiped it out.
That alligator serum probably killed roughly 95 to 98% of the original bacteria that it encountered.
Well, that's an incredible difference. You know, what makes the alligator blood so super efficient at fighting the bacterial infection?
Our studies have shown that the alligator serum has a lot of the same proteins and molecular mechanisms to fight infection that humans do. But it turns out that theirs is much better than ours.
Since dinosaurs share an ancient ancestor with crocodiles, they probably inherited the same super immune system. Another clue about why the Gorgosaur and Sioux survived their injuries. Crocs have a powerful inherent immune system, meaning their infection fighters are primed to defend against bacterial invaders the first time it meets them, while the human's immune system works best after being infected. And Mark's work suggests crocs didn't acquire that system recently. It may reach back as far as the gators and dinosaurs' common ancestor.
What we're seeing here is a very ancient molecular innate immune mechanism. It goes way back to the early days of crocodilians and dinosaurs, several 100 million years ago.
With a super immune system, the Gorgosaur could keep deadly infection at bay in its mangled lower leg. This bought the animal critical extra time to repair its wounds and get back into the race for survival. The same with Sue. Suffering multiple injuries from her risky Rex behavior, she may have relied on super infection fighters and fast-healing bones. Tyrannosaurs were tough. And now, thanks to medical CT scanning, FEA crash tests, and a bit of crocodilian blood work, Phil's figured out precisely how tough. His investigation suggests that never before has a group of animals been so close to indestructible. First, dinosaurs possibly came armed with a brilliant immune system inherited from their crocodilian ancestors. Then, like birds, they adapted to quickly heal their bones, and sometimes came back stronger. Combined with a powerful frame and ferocious weaponry, these superpowers transformed tyrannosaurs into nearly bulletproof predators, ideally suited to a long, long life in the perilous world of the Cretaceous.
Jeez.
Oh.